regulators with on-demand failover. So two quick announcements, and I'm also going to introduce today's presenters. First is that there is a handout section in GoToWebinar, so you can grab a copy of these slides in that handout section. If for whatever reason you don't see the slides there, simply send an email to team@infrascale.com and we'll send a copy to you. Also, you will be able to access a copy of this recording. We are going to be recording and then posting it on our website at infrascale.com/webinars. So be sure to check that out. Presenting today is going to be Wayne Sadin. He's a member of the Infrascale Advisory Board. He's been in financial services technology since 1979. Also presenting is Ken Shaw. He's the founder and CEO of Infrascale. He's an experienced engineer and entrepreneur in the disaster recovery industry. So now I'll pass it over to Ken.
Terrific, thanks Carla. And Wayne, great to have you here. Everybody on the screen, you can see Wayne and my Twitter handles, so we'd encourage you to write those down and feel free to direct messages on Twitter. Also, we're going to have a hashtag for today's webinar so we can actually all talk about the subject matter collectively. The agenda looks a little bit like this. First, Wayne, who is a true subject matter expert and knows the ins and outs of DR and data protection in the financial institution space better than anyone else I've met in my career. He's going to walk us through some of the particulars, some of the particular challenges that community banks and credit unions face in data protection, and in particular, failover. Then Wayne's going to take us through this new technology called DRAAS, or DRAAS, some people say it, but it's disaster recovery as a service, which at its heart is using the cloud to eradicate downtime and deliver sort of instant failover for you. Wayne's then going to talk about the benefits as these particularly relate to financial institutions, and then take you through a sort of a buying criteria that you can use when you're vetting DRAAS vendors. After that, you're going to hear from me again, and I'll tell you a little bit about the Infrascale solution and how we've worked with many banks and credit unions across the country to help eliminate downtime and allow you to fail over in 15 minutes or less, guaranteed. There's going to be a prize giveaway at the end of today's webinar, and so that prize goes to the person who asks the most questions throughout. So find that questions tool and start asking questions. And Carla will be announcing the prize, which is a what, Carla?
It's an Xbox One.
Fantastic. So for any of you gamers out there, we're giving away an Xbox One, or I'm sure you could sell it on eBay. But that's going to be to the person who asks the most on-point questions. So don't be shy, and you can start asking them now. And with that, Wayne, take it away.
Thank you very much, Ken. When Ken called me a subject matter expert on disaster recovery, I thank you, Ken. But what I think I've learned over 30-some-odd years in financial services technology is how to deal with the regulators, the auditors, both internal and external, and the compliance folks. So I think the key to disaster recovery, besides getting our companies back when we have a problem, is being able to demonstrate to the auditors, regulators, and compliance folks that we have our arms around this, and that lets us get on with the business of providing service to our employees and our members. So those of you that haven't been a CIO, you think a CIO is a big position, but I'll point out that the CIO is a position of remarkably little power. When I got to be CIO, I thought, well, I got it made, but then I realized I had a CFO, a chief marketing officer, a chief risk officer, a chief operating officer, a chief auditor, and of course the CEO, board of directors, and then all the external forces kind of telling me what to do. The good news is, in financial services, we have a couple of structures that help us determine what to do. We have the CAMELS rating environment that's put out by the regulators. Next slide, please. And the CAMELS rating, for those that haven't seen it, talks about capital adequacy, assets, management capability, earnings, liquidity, and sensitivity to market risk. If you haven't been ranked this way, we in IT and risk and operations live in the M for management capability. So what the regulators are looking to see is, are we able to manage the institution? A bad CAMELS rating prevents an institution from buying other companies, from opening more branches, from getting into adjacent business lines, and it can be a terrible black mark on the record. So it's up to us to control what we can by having a good and managed disaster recovery environment. The good news is the FFIEC, the Federal Financial Institution Examination Council, an intra-company regulatory group, has promulgated a set of standards that talks about how we should run our business and how we should run our disaster recovery. And one of the things it talks about is how disaster recovery flows. So next slide, and we'll look at that. In 30 some odd years of being audited, I've learned that there's a certain cadence to the exam, to the compliance engagement. Everything starts with the written DR plan. If you don't have one, shame on you. You've got to have one. And obviously, the written plan describes what you're going to do in the case of different disasters. And that then leads to a data storage plan that says this is what we've got to store and where. And of course, we've got to test, whether you're testing annually, semi-annually, quarterly, or even monthly. Your tests in accordance with your written plan. You share the test results, document what failed. And if you haven't done these tests, or your boss expects you to have a perfect DR test, there's no such thing. There's always something that you ought to be stressing, and always something you can improve for the next one. Then you build a remediation plan, and that goes right back into the written DR plan. A point that's important here is that the regulators always start with, what's your written plan? Then they go to, are you following the plan when you're testing, or God forbid you had a disaster? And then they say, is it a great plan or a good plan? But if you don't have a written plan and you don't follow it, you will immediately fail most audits that I've seen over 30-something years. So I said that things always fail. Let's look at the disaster recovery site types and the processes that we use to minimize failure. There's a lot of acronyms on this, so let's talk about a couple of them. RTO, the recovery time objective, talks about how long till we get a system or process back running. The RPO, or recovery point objective, talks about how far back we've got data or how much data we've lost. And so we have four basic kinds of disaster recovery sites that we deal with. There's the mirrored site. If you're doing stock trading, credit card transactions, running the global military, you cannot afford any failures, period. So you run a mirrored site. You process every transaction twice or more times, and then nothing ever fails because you've got two of everything, or maybe three of everything. So very, very quick RTO, very minimal RPO, and very, very, very high cost. I've done this before with CAMELS and STRATOSs and special equipment and multiple data centers, and you wind up in an environment where you're spending an awful lot of money, but you get great results. Hot site is more typical. That says I've got a data center, building, rack, whatever, full of equipment. It's ready to go. The data is being streamed over there, and I've got the ability to pick up the load in less than 4 hours, more or less, and I've got zero data loss because everything is being streamed over in some manner. That is also a very expensive alternative because I typically got 1.5 to 1.9, 2.0 times the amount of hardware total that I need to run my daily production. Warm site, of course, I've got some equipment there. I'm moving some data there. I may have some people there. I get a little less protection, but I get it for a little less money. And then we have a cold site, which is essentially a building full of nothing, and that's where we go when we have people that have to be moved in. This model has lived with us for 50-something years, and there's a number of trade-offs we make in this model. So if you think about it, for all these years, next slide please, we've had a curve that starts with offsite tape backup, very cheap, but obviously doesn't give us full protection. We've then added an appliance, and that gave us the ability to back up things locally. We copy data to another site. That's getting away from tape and moving online. We have a cold site. That's a place where our data may be stored, a warm site, and then we go up and we've got a hot site there. The thing about this curve is the curve has not changed much in 50 or more years. But there's something coming up on the horizon or here now that changes the curve. The cloud changes everything. The physics of the cloud talk about how very large companies have invested billions of dollars building very high performance, very secure data centers that allow us to change the equation and provide a level of DR cost and performance that frankly we never were able to deal with before because the curves just move slowly. Next slide. We're going to talk now about disaster recovery, and I call it yesterday and tomorrow, and there's no today. The reason is, what I realized when I was putting this together, as I said, is for 50 years we've done yesterday's thing, a little faster, a little faster, a little cheaper, a little cheaper. And I'm going to show you why the cloud lets us change things. First question that comes up is, well, can I work in the cloud? After all, the cloud is new, the cloud is insecure, blah, blah, blah. The good news is the FFIEC has published cloud guidelines. There was a statement I did, I think, last year that talks about 6 elements that have to be looked at. I'm not going to read them to you. It's on the screen. Hey, folks, shocking news. This is the same set of requirements that you'd have if you were outsourcing anything. So the good news about the cloud is, from a regulatory, from a controls, and it looks a whole heck of a lot like what we've been outsourcing to Black Knight or Fiserv or Fidelity for all these years, but it just has the guise of the cloud. So now that we've said that the regulatory guideline is there, let's look at the kinds of clouds we can have. Next slide. Generally, clouds break into 2 categories, public and private. Public are the Amazon, Windows, Google, IBM, and in fact, Infrascale. This is a company that's built data centers around the world that provide you with a service that you can use. Private cloud is something you build yourself or that you pay some local provider to assemble for you. The pros in the public cloud are they've invested billions of dollars in very scalable, very secure assets that you buy by the drink. You buy them a little bit at a time as you need them, provision them, deprovision them very dynamically. The pros and cons of a private cloud are it's private, so it's yours, it's where you want it, you can go touch the boxes, you can go walk the corridors, and you've got full control. The problem is it's going to cost you a lot more probably per gigabyte or per megabit per second than it costs Microsoft or Facebook. And you've got to deal with scalability issues. If I've got 10 racks in my private cloud and I do a 50% branch expansion, I may not have the ability to add 4 racks overnight, whereas with a public cloud, we can do that. So let's talk about and compare disaster recovery yesterday and disaster recovery tomorrow. Next slide. Yesterday, and I asked Infrascale to put this picture because it reminds me of my early days in data processing. The only difference is they're wearing suits and ties, but I wore a white coat to walk on the raised floor. This was slow, it was expensive, it was hardware intensive, capital intensive, and frankly, it was very prone to failure. And tomorrow, the world of the cloud, it's much more affordable, and it takes advantage of the physics and economics of the cloud. So let's talk about the benefits to you folks in financial services. Look, the first one is having disaster recovery that's effective and that allows you to put more per dollar of expense meets the member needs, customer needs, employee needs when crisis strikes. It helps you meet your compliance audits and exam requirements. If you can go to a single place and show the regulators, the auditors, everything is here, everything works, I've tested it, here's my test results, that saves you at best an awful lot of audit expense, whether you're internal or external or having the regulators there. And at best, it lets you say to management, the board, and anybody else, we've got it under control. And again, you can focus on the real work of IT in a financial institution. Offices and subsidiaries and have them restored to the cloud or an appliance as needed. It's paid by what you need. You divest some branches, you turn some stuff off. You do an acquisition, you turn some stuff back on. It's cost savings. You don't have to put in the capital. You're buying it on an expense basis. It's very flexible. You can protect against, as a micro disasters. I lost a server. I lost a rack. Water leaked on part of my infrastructure in my outsourcing center. I can fix the internal things, which Infrascale calls micro disasters. And I can fix the more traditional disasters, hurricane, tornado, windstorm, flooding, acts of nature that take out an entire data center or a whole region. So I've got the ability to protect there. And what I find most interesting, having been in financial services for many years, is when management comes to you and says, hey, we've done an acquisition and we're going to expand the branch footprint 50% in 90 days. It doesn't become a balancing act. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do? You call up the cloud vendor, push some buttons, and get 50% more capacity. So when you're going to do an acquisition and you've got to take over their infrastructure, which may in fact be very different from your infrastructure, but nobody does a conversion that fast, you can back up their infrastructure, wherever it is, to the same cloud technology that you've got, and then quite frankly use that to migrate back to your primary core systems and have very quick coverage. At the same time, you've got the ability to do a slow migration. So let's talk about a couple of things that you have to look at when you're looking at a DRAAS vendor. Look, I'm here on behalf of Infrascale, but a lot is about the cloud in general, the physics of the cloud, the economics of the cloud. And to be honest, it's not just Infrascale that takes advantage of them. I think Infrascale does a better job than most, but everybody living in the cloud world is able to use this capability. But these are the key questions that you, as a regulated institution delivering high levels of service, need to be asking your cloud vendors. How is the data encrypted in transit and at rest? Look, if you're not encrypting your data at rest and data in motion, you're violating lots of regs plus. Can you easily test application data recovery? Can you simulate it? Can you test it? If not, you're going to wind up with a quarterly or annual test. Speaking from experience, if you screw up an annual test, it's a very expensive thing to have to redo, and it looks terrible on your record for a year. Can I look in one place to get a pulse? Is there a glass that tells you how my loan officers' machines are being backed up, how my branches are being backed up, how my core applications are being backed up? Can you scale to grow? If the solution does not scale easily, then you've given up the benefit of the cloud. How long does it take to fail over? Obviously, the point of a disaster recovery solution is getting things back online. So you've got to be able to get them back and running. Where are your virtual machines virtualized? Are they on a secondary appliance? Are they in the cloud, or are they both? This lets you trade off quick responsiveness for a disaster with lower cost and geographical resiliency. And then last, because I'm a regulated kind of guy, do you have an audit log? Can people look at what happened, when it happened, and be able to prove to regulators, auditors, and anybody else that you've got your arms around the problem? So I've kind of given you an update on DRAAS, on the regulatory environment, on the compliance environment, and I'm hoping that we have a lot of questions up to now. Everybody remember, we are giving away I think it's an Xbox One for good questions, and lots of them. So please ask me questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Ken to talk about the nuts and bolts of the Infrascale solution, and I hope you're going to ask him a lot of questions. Ken, take it away.
Terrific. Thank you, Wayne. And again, it's wonderful to have somebody who really knows what he's talking about on these webinars. Normally, the audience has to put up with me. So thank you all for joining today. And let me now talk about Infrascale's solution to deliver DR for small banks and credit unions. We're working with many small financial institutions across the country, and we have this observation that the regulatory requirements that you are faced with as a small financial institution are disproportionately difficult for you to comply with, right? And while very large banks may have the budgets necessary to put hot sites in place, and that's very nice for them, many small organizations, particularly credit unions or community banks, struggle with this and struggle with the sort of chain that Wayne was talking about, the DR test, the DR plan, the DR test, the report on where there were perhaps some issues, and then remediation. And so here at Infrascale, we're trying to design a solution for mid-sized organizations across all verticals, but particularly in highly regulated industries like financial services and healthcare, to provide on-demand failover at a price point similar to tape backup. And so what do? Well, we deliver DR as a service, but also cloud backup, archiving, and endpoint protection. And why do we do it? Because we think it's crazy that the computing world has evolved so far and so fast in so many different directions, but we're still using the same data protection paradigm that, as Wayne said, we first adopted back in the 50s with mainframes. And so we think the cloud presents a unique opportunity to disrupt that, and that's what we're trying to do. And so people think we're doing a good job. So in 2015, we were named Gartner's Cool Vendor in Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery. We've got partners all around the world. In fact, we've got 1,000 partners, and we're protecting more than 1 million devices. We deliver our cloud out of 16 points of presence around the world. We're currently protecting more than 100 petabytes of data, which is a little bit. And so our mission is pretty simple, although it's a lofty goal. It's to help eradicate downtime by equipping every company with the ability to recover from disasters quickly and affordably. And it's that ability to do it both quickly and affordably that sets us apart. So this is our platform today. If the first thing is to think about what are the sorts of devices that we're going to protect. And so in our case, we try and span the gamut. We protect everything from mobiles to mainframes. So whether we're talking about backing up laptop fleets, or if we're talking about physical servers running Windows or Unix or Linux, whether we're talking about virtualized environments on VMware or Hyper-V, or whether we're talking about perhaps some more sort of legacy technology platforms like AIX or HPUX or Solaris, Infrascale supports all of the above. And we don't just support that for traditional backup and recovery operations or for data archiving, but crucially, we support it for push-button failover. And when I say push-button failover, I literally mean the ability to step through a 4-step wizard, at the end of which a process kicks off which guarantees to bring your infrastructure back up and running within 15 minutes. And that's very powerful. I'm going to talk about sort of the change in the physics that represents in a second. But before I do, it's worth pointing out that we don't tie you into using the Infrascale cloud. We believe in a world that's going to not have 4 large monolithic clouds, the Amazons and Googles, but is going to have thousands of clouds that have got to interoperate. We believe in a hybrid cloud future. And so when you work with us, you can use your cloud, our cloud, or frankly, any cloud. And so if you think about the evolution of data protection that Wayne was talking about earlier, we've had this linear relationship between the time it'll take you to get back up and running and the price point. So tape became the primary data protection sort of paradigm in the 70s, largely attached to mainframes and then minis. And if you sort of think about that evolution through where disk became the primary mechanism in the 90s, cloud emerged as an option in the noughties, but all of these things have still had a linear relationship between the time it takes you to get back up and running and the amount of money you've got to pay. What's really exciting about DRAAS is the first time where you can achieve warm site or hot site recovery times, but do so at a price point that is more similar to traditional backup technology. And if we can just get a little bit sort of nerdy together here, I want you to think about the backup and recovery workflow and the way the bits and the bytes move, right? So at the top of this diagram is a traditional backup and restore flow. On the left, we've got a bunch of infrastructure that we're protecting. And the first verb here is backup, the little green box. And so that operation is a fancy copy. It might be doing all sorts of other things, indexing and deduplicating and compressing and encrypting, but at its heart, we are copying some bytes over a wire. And then when bad things happen, what we do is we go and get new computing resources, like a new physical server, and we run a restore operation. And that restore operation, again, is a fancy copy. Yes, we might be rehydrating deduplicated data and decrypting and decompressing, but at the end of the day, we are bounded by how quickly we can move bits and bytes over a wire. And and then, by the way, after we do that copy, we've still got to reconfigure our servers and get them back up and running. So that flow of doing the recovery back to new computing infrastructure, reconfiguring it, and then starting it up can take hours or days, depending upon the exact technologies that you're using. So there's 2 things to note about this, just sort of from an algorithmic perspective. The first one is that the amount of time involved is variable, right? It's a function of the number of gigabytes or terabytes that you're dealing with. So this is not a fixed time operation. And the other one is what I've already talked about. Because of the physics involved, this can take hours or days, or if you've got tape involved, it can actually take a week. In the DRAAS paradigm, which is modeled at the bottom here in the blue, we're actually going to do something quite different. So yes, we're going to protect the infrastructure on the left, and that's still going to be a fancy copy operation into the appliance. But then I want you to note the two orange circles in the bottom. So we're going to copy the data into the appliance and then replicate that data to the cloud. And if you see where the run option is here, the run option is either on the on-prem appliance or in the cloud itself. So whereas in backup and recovery, after a disaster, we copy the data back to our new compute infrastructure and then we run it. And that's a variable time operation. In DRAAS, we move the compute to where the data is, right? And we run it right there on the data, completely eliminating the recovery step. And so that sort of sounds academic, but it's actually pretty wonderful in terms of its impact for a business. It means, firstly, you've now turned recovery into a fixed time operation, so you can plan around that. You know how long it's going to take, your downside is bounded. And secondly, it's dramatically faster. Advances in compute and networking and virtualization has meant that we can bring up that compute on those data stores in 30 seconds, right? Now, not everyone can do that. And in fact, Infrascale is at the cutting edge of this. With Infrascale, we guarantee that you'll be able to bring back your servers and have them running within 15 minutes or less. And we guarantee 15 minutes because it's usually 30 seconds or a minute, right? And that's what's so powerful about our solution. We're delivering the business value of fixed time recovery and the business value of hot site failover, but we're doing it at the price point of your tape backup, your enterprise tape backup library. And so we're not the only ones who've identified that this is a breakthrough technology. And in fact, if you look at the estimates coming out of analysts, they're saying that the DRAAS market is going to grow from $1 billion last year to $12 billion by 2020. And that money is not coming from nowhere, right? It's not as if this is new money is being added to enterprise budgets for this. It's going to come from existing storage budgets and backup budgets. So that what analysts are all predicting is that we're going to use the cloud, we're going to use this kind of DRAAS technology and replace the legacy backup and recovery paradigm, which firstly has, we've been saddled with for decades too long in my opinion. And secondly, just doesn't properly take advantage of this new cloud-centric world that we're living in. And so when we talk about the Infrascale solution, there's a few key things to know about it. The first is it's designed to protect any device. So yes, we're going to protect your servers, and yes, we're going to protect your virtual clusters, and but we're also going to protect your laptop fleets, right? So if you've got managers who are using laptops and carrying sensitive data in and out of the organization, we're going to protect those too. We'll even protect mobile devices. Secondly, we're going to support every OS that's common in the mid-market. So if you've got Linux and you've got Unix and you've got VMware and you've got Hyper-V and you've got AIX, that's no problem when you're using Infrascale. Normally, that would require you to cobble together multiple solutions from multiple vendors, but not with us. Next, we're going to let you deploy in whatever form factor makes sense for you. So we can give you our solution in software or with an appliance or directly to the cloud. And when we say the cloud, as we've sort of mentioned, we're talking about any cloud. So that could be a major public cloud like Amazon, or that could be a private cloud that you've already set up, or there's also then the Infrascale cloud. Next, recover anything. In sort of backup theory, we talk about RTO and RPO all the time. But I think we need this new concept of a recovery object type, an ROT. And the reason I say that is there's a fundamental difference between recovering a file and folder or disk and recovering a running system. And what we at Infrascale are talking about when we say recovery is we're going to recover a running system or a group of running systems. And that is fundamentally more valuable to you as a customer than if we can hand you a file or a database back. Next, we're going to give you flexibility of where to boot. So because our technology is architected as a hybrid cloud solution, with Infrascale, in case of recovery, you can bring back your infrastructure locally on-prem, either running on our appliance or somewhere else in the network, or you can bring it up in the cloud, and you've got that flexibility. With many DR solutions, you don't have that ability to bring up single servers on-prem. And of course, with most disasters are micro disasters, not macro disasters. So failing your entire office over to the cloud really doesn't make sense most of the time. So when you're choosing a DRAAS vendor, make sure you choose a technology platform that lets you do on-prem failover for micro failures and off-site failover for macro failures. And then lastly, you've got to have the ability to fail back any time. You don't want to get stuck in someone's data jail and be forced to keep running your compute infrastructure at very high prices. You want to be able to bring that back easily and seamlessly into your infrastructure. So let's talk now about how this actually gets deployed and wired up. The easiest way to use our solution is for us to install one of our appliances in your network. It's then going to reach out and discover all the devices. You can then set up the mapping so it will protect and grab all the data it needs to from your database servers, your app servers, your VMware clusters, your Hyper-V clusters. Then on-prem, it's going to do all of that dedupe and compression and encryption that you need to do to sort of shrink. In fact, we get more than 90% data dehydration rate. So we can shrink most data payloads by 90%. After that, the device is going to be replicating to the cloud. And that entire process is going to be encrypted end-to-end, and I'll talk more about that in a second. Then in the case of a failover, you can bring up your servers both right there on-prem on our hyper-converged appliance or up in the cloud. And it's literally a 4-step wizard that you click through. And so it's easy enough that you can do it yourself. You can delegate it to relatively junior administrators. There's quite powerful permissions that you can set. If you're a partner, then you can let your customers do this, or of course you can rely on us to do it for you. So in the case of a disaster, it's always nice to have an expert at the other end of the phone, and so our staff are available 24/7 to walk you through that process of recovering. But it's important to note that you don't need that, right? With many DR vendors, you have to declare a disaster, fill in a form. It's a very expensive, very intense and hardcore thing. And so Wayne talked earlier about testing and how important testing the DR plan is to the overall compliance effort, particularly within the context of, of financial institutions. Well, many DR vendors will give you a certain number of tests per year, right? Because exercising the failover is so hardcore for them. Because we've made it so drop-dead simple to fail a server over, we provide our customers with the ability to test an unlimited number of failovers. You can test any subset or your entire DR plan as many times as you like, right? And again, using the economics of the cloud, we can deliver that to you at a fraction of the price point of traditional DR solutions. Now, I touched on security, and I wanted to dwell on it for a little bit longer. One of the things that I've found odd about the data protection industry is that although in data protection, we are the custodians of usually all of the data in a company, security is always something that data protection vendors have pushed off to other vendors. So if you think about sort of the way Backup Exec or a Commvault or a NetBackup or a Legato Networker before it was EMC, if you think about the way those systems were implemented, security was always something that was being handled by another vendor, which is quite strange. Imagine if, as a small bank, and as your job, you've collected all of the gold from the citizens of your community. Imagine if you didn't have a bank vault and you protected that. Well, that's sort of akin to what's been going on in the data protection industry. And I use that anecdote whimsically, given the audience today. But I think it's incumbent upon data protection vendors to build security into their systems from the ground up and have it be a first-class feature. So at Infrascale, we've implemented what's called double-blind encryption, based on an encryption regime developed first by the Pentagon in the 70s and 80s. But it really boils down to this, that data will be encrypted before it leaves your premises with a key that only you know. It'll then be sent over an encrypted tunnel to our servers or in our cloud, and then it'll be encrypted with another key that only we know. And we have to cooperate to get that data back out. And that doesn't completely eliminate the risk of data breach, but it vastly reduces the chance. And when you think about the Sony breach, and if you think about the Office of Personnel Management breach, in which millions of dollars worth of intellectual property was destroyed, and in the case of the OPM, millions of personal records of citizens were disseminated, both of those attacks leveraged the backup and archive systems, right? And so this is not an academic thing that our data protection systems are a target. This is a real life thing. And so if you take one thing away from this webinar, go and ask, how is your current data protection regime being encrypted and protected? So then coming back again to the value proposition, we've talked about value throughout here a lot, and it really goes back to our mission, right? So this slide gives you sort of 6 different ways we help you stretch your IT dollars and go further. But we believe in allowing mid-market companies to enjoy the type of DR and failover that up until now has only been available to the biggest and the richest. And we believe in protecting everything. So what we find is that even if, I'm sure this is true of people in the audience today, even if you've got failover in place for one system, I bet you don't have it in place for all your systems. You've got to pick and choose which systems or which databases you're actually going to protect. And so we believe not only in just delivering on-demand failover to the mid-market, but also making sure you can use that on-demand technology for all of your infrastructure. And so when you then compare us to some of the other vendors in the market, what you're going to see thematically is that we're providing a far more sophisticated service at a much lower price point, and fundamentally with a recovery time guarantee. So none of our competitors will guarantee the amount of time that it takes to bring your servers back up and running. We will. Other vendors might specialize just in VMware or just in Hyper-V, or they might only really be able to deal with, say, Windows physical servers. We're the only vendor who's committed to supporting all of the major operating systems predominant in the mid-market. And then despite the fact that we're delivering the best quality of service and the most robust number of platforms, we're still making certain that our total cost of ownership is lower than any of the other DRAAS vendors, because they're not really doing it. They're not really using the cloud to do this. What they're really doing is just racking and stacking hardware on the other side of things. And the cloud gives us, as Wayne said, both a new physics equation and also a new economic equation. So wrapping it all up and putting it together, what makes Infrascale different? Well, we're fighting the fact that DR has been too expensive by delivering disaster recovery at about 20% of the price point of traditional solutions. We're helping you combat the fact that you've got insufficient IT resources and you want to get to being able to set up failover and DR for all of your servers, but you just don't have either the human resources or the budget resources to put that in place. And so we're solving that by giving you push-button failover for all your infrastructure. And lastly, we're removing the complexity and combating it can so often plague mid-sized organizations by committing to supporting over 100 versions of the major operating systems, by committing to support all of the major cloud technologies out there, and by giving you your choice of public cloud, private cloud, or hybrid cloud. And so that takes us to the end of the CAN portion of today's webinar, folks. And so, again, really want to invite you to contact us on Twitter. We actually got a hashtag to discuss today's webinar, DRAAS for financial institution. So you can go on Twitter and anything that you tag with that hashtag we'll respond to. And then as well you can direct message me. I'm at Ken Shaw Jr. And Wayne, what's your handle? We'll get Wayne's handle here in a second. Okay, so next we're going to go to the Q&A. So what we're going to do here, folks, is if your question is directed at one of us in particular, you can say this is for Wayne or this is for Ken. Carl is going to start reading out some of these questions. We're going to take these. And so Wayne, hope you're ready for the Q&A now, bud.
I am.
Let's do it.
Okay, great. The first question is from Kevin. And Kevin says, all this sounds good. How do you account for business applications that do not fit the mold?
So Kevin, it really depends on what sort of business app you're talking about. We've worked with So we're working with hundreds of municipalities, law enforcement, hospital, banks, credit unions, financial services organizations, law firms across the country. And so I'll wager that whatever you're dealing with, we've seen before and we've solved before. And so we've got a dedicated team who can help you set up, configure, and manage these solutions. We've also got 1,000 partners around the world, so almost certainly we've got somebody in whichever city you're based in who can help you get this up and running too.
Ken, this is Wayne. I saw the rest of the question, I think, talks about the fact that it was an IBM I series. The application was Epicus, and it runs on the old Power system. So I think that was
yep.
the particular environment that question was around.
Terrific. Okay, so it's either going to be running IBM I or it's going to be running AIX, on a system I underlying infrastructure. We support that. We support AIX 5, 6, and 7. And so, love you to get in touch with us, and we can figure out a way to cost effectively give you, data protection and failover.
The next question is from Jason, and Jason asks, are there any overage costs in the cloud as limits are met? What if I go over capacity? Is my data not protected?
Your data will always be protected with us. We'll never leave you unprotected. And there's very, very rarely overage costs. And the reason I say that is our pricing is not driven by sort of overages and, if you use more CPU and sort of all of those hidden gotchas that most cloud vendors use. For us, we come to an agreement about the amount of data that you're going to store with us and the number of servers you want to run concurrently. And you can then store that much data and run that many servers, and you're never going to pay a dime extra. And you can exercise it as many times as you like. You can fail over as many times as you like. You can perform an unlimited number of tests. There's no other vendor in the market who can say any of that. And so the only time that you would then there would be overages is if you in fact end up storing more terabytes in our cloud than you'd contracted for.
And then Jason also asks, what is your support like? Do you have 24/7 support?
We do have 24/7 support. And in addition to that, we've then got our 1,000 partners around the world. So you can either work with our partner or you can work directly with us.
Okay, I see two questions just came through. The first one for Ken and the next one for Wayne. Kevin asked, what are the network/WAN requirements to both corporate sites and branches to accomplish all the data being pushed through the pipes?
So the sort of short answer and a long answer. Short answer is it depends. But what we'll normally say, we'll normally provide a short answer of, look, if you've got at least a 10 megabit connection to the public internet, that's going to be sufficient. Now, the real answer, as you know, is that your mileage may vary. And so this is going to be a function of the amount of data that you have and the type of data that you have. Because of our deduplication and because of our WAN acceleration, we can shrink your data payload pretty enormously. We can usually, through dedupe, we can usually shrink it by 90%. And then with our own patent-pending WAN acceleration, we can usually get 2 to 3 times more throughput from your public link than you're going to get, with normal internet traffic. All of that means that if you're only pushing sort of terabytes or tens of terabytes, a 10 megabit link is going to be fine. Obviously, the faster is the better. Now, there's other things to consider with the cloud. Oftentimes, feeding the cloud can be an issue. So oftentimes what we'll do is send a physical unit on site, do a LAN-based copy, and then use that to seed the cloud for you over our 10 gig links. Hope that answered the question.
Okay, next question is from Jason, and he is asking a question for Wayne. He said, Wayne, you talked about disaster recovery yesterday and today, and you mentioned that banks and credit unions haven't changed their DR in decades. Do you have any positive feedback on those that have changed and what their experience has been like?
Well, I'm not at liberty to share specifics. Obviously, one characteristic of financial services institutions is their reticence. The answer is that companies that have used the cloud and use it wisely have been able to take advantage of the physics, as I call it, and the economics. It is very possible, once you've spent $20 billion, like Microsoft, Google, Facebook, et cetera, have done, to build very, very efficient, hyperscale, hyper-converged data centers. Economies of scale in infrastructure are passed on to the company using it. Taking advantage of the economics of it and the physics means that you can get tremendous upside, lower cost, better agility, scalability, and in fact better security. I would suggest that you reach out within your local trade association, your local user group, and your friends and neighbors, and just ask them for their experiences. The good news is with the FFIEC recognizing the cloud exists and treating it pretty much like an outsourced product, the regulatory barriers are starting to fall and the acceptance is starting to go up. So all I can say kind of publicly is that more and more companies are using the cloud, whether private or public, by the way, and seeing the benefits of being agile in their back end. You know, we've all got agile development, I hope, but now we can get more of the DevOps model, which offers agility in the back end of your infrastructure.
Great. Okay, and the next question comes from Kevin. And Kevin says, regulators will get out a bigger magnifying glass if you say, I'm in a public cloud. What support do you provide for those tougher inquiries?
Well, I'll take it, and then if Ken has an answer from the Infrascale perspective, he can give it. The answer is the fact that what attracted me to Infrascale was their motto is your cloud, our cloud, any cloud. And so regulators are individuals. You know, we can think of the vast, faceless bureaucracy in Washington. It's not true. There's a human being that comes out, and depending on the size of your institution, comes out once a year, comes out once a month, or in fact has an office in your headquarters. The comfort of that person and their local team with any technology determines the size of their magnifying glass. So if you've got an intransigent regulator, private cloud, hybrid cloud, a vendor they already have vetted. Obviously pick vendors that have very strong security, controls, and compliance, and pick a vendor that the regulator will essentially trust. But because you could run in any cloud, you can get the benefits of Infrascale's capability and have your own cloud and then deal with the regulators like you deal with any other piece of infrastructure. And Ken, maybe you want to say a few words about the standards and other things that Infrascale is adherent to.
Certainly. And so, yeah, the first, so Wayne's bang on. The Your Cloud, Our Cloud, Any Cloud framework allows you to sort of choose a cloud of your choice. And by the way, we're elite partners with IBM Smart Cloud, also with Amazon Web Services. You've then got the Amazon Web Services GovCloud options. There's a lot of options there. When it comes to Infrascale's cloud, we're PCI compliant, we're SAS 70 audited, SSAE 16 certified, HIPAA compliant for those, you know, in the healthcare world. So we take compliance very seriously. But at the end of the day, it's going to be about your individual organization, about your regulatory pressure, either external or internal, and you know, we've got a solution that works in any of these configurations.
Okay, great. So let's go to the next question. And Jason asks, is Infrascale an agent-based backup or agentless?
Great question. Again, the answer is it depends. So for certain environments, we can be deployed in an agent-based or agentless configuration, and it's horses for courses. In virtual environments, when you're dealing with hypervisors, agentless is usually the best. So if you've got a VMware-based environment or a Hyper-V-based environment, then we would recommend that you deploy Infrascale in an agentless way and connect directly to the hypervisor host. On the other hand, if you're dealing with, say, a branch office, single server, or if you're dealing with maybe some older infrastructure like AIX, then installing an agent on that individual server is usually going to be the best approach. So again, it's going to be a balancing act of what goals are you trying to achieve. Usually we can provide better application sensitivity with an agent-based approach. But we support both models, and so it's really going to be a matter of what is the application that you're trying to protect and what does your system configuration look like.
Great. And then two somewhat similar questions from Kevin and from Ryan regarding specific pricing, where it sounds like we're going to need to put you in touch with one of our territory reps. But Kevin asked, if I understood the diagram correctly and the discussion, the on-premise appliance will spin up servers in a quick disaster solution. Assuming 200 plus servers and 200 plus desktops, what size and price would be required for that appliance? And then Ryan also says, where can I get access to specific pricing? So for both of these, Kevin and Ryan, I'll say I will reach out to you after this presentation so that I can put you in touch with someone who's going to assess your exact needs and be able to give you correct and accurate pricing for the amount of data that you have. And
on that note, actually, this is sort of a call out to everybody in the audience. For those of you who are interested in what you've heard about today and would like a demo or have a sales engineer walk you through it, or even an evaluation, please let us know at the questions tool. So in the questions tool, just say, look, I'd like a demo or an evaluation unit. You know, I work at such and such a credit union. Here's my email address and my phone number. So, you know, we'd be thrilled to take you through the technology. Wayne actually said to me once that when he first saw the Infrascale demo, he was blown away by it. And actually, Wayne, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Maybe you could just share with the audience your experience there.
Yeah, well, I'll just say that when I saw the demo and they were taking me through, I kept asking questions, and the answer was yes, 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 yes. What impresses me most, and I know that Ken keeps talking about how fast they get everything running, what impresses me most is the single pane of glass, the fact that they can back up pretty much everything. You know, whether you've used Mosey or CrashPlan or any of these other toys to back up all your desktops, all your laptops, all your executive machines, you can do it with the Infrascale technology. Whether you're backing up large machines, small machines, local machines, remote machines, you can do it with the Infrascale technology. These folks have got so many agents and so many ways to connect that the typical financial institution is, frankly, we hate to admit it, it's a hodgepodge. Financial services have been using technology longer than almost every other industry. So there's always some obsolete weirdo thing in the corner, your NetWare or your WordPerfect system. And when I asked Ken about some of these odd solutions, he said, yes, yes, yes. And I have referenceable clients who can show it to you. So the nice thing about it is we don't have to be that perfect little orderly diagram that we all like to draw in our spare time. We can be the messy, ugly shops that do acquisitions of God only knows what and still get it protected and backed up. And that's what I thought set Infrascale apart from the other vendors I looked at. They have so many options that you can pretty much do whatever you need to do.
Terrific. Thanks for sharing that. And so, Wayne, that actually brings us to the end of the webinar. I've just put our exit poll up on screen there for the audience. But again, Wayne, just want to thank you for your time today, mate. It's wonderful to have a true expert. It's always a pleasure to do these presentations with you. Remember, again, for the audience, you'll get a video recording of today's webinar. For those of you who asked questions that we didn't have time to get to, our apologies. We'll be following up with you via email on all of those questions later today. And, of course, we'll be announcing the winner of that Xbox. So stay close to your inbox, and you'll get probably all those emails at roughly the same time. So, Wayne, thank you, sir. And ladies and gentlemen of the audience, thanks for joining us today. Hope to talk to you all again soon.
My pleasure, Ken. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye now.